Hey guys, it's Steph from Render Me This, and today we are going to talk about the pen tool. So right now I have a garment loaded in my software. If you need access to a garment that's already created, already stitched together, you can go under File and Import from Cloud, and Browzwear offers a bunch of free assets to you. So there's fashion snoops, there's like kids, men's, stay away from the smart design, but there's women's ones as well. And you can click into the area, find which garment you want, select it, download, and open it. Once it has downloaded and open, I'm going to load the snapshot. So clicking the drop down up here and clicking my snapshot to load it on my avatar. So like I said, we're going to talk about the pen tool today and just talk about some of the properties and things we can do with it. So right up here is my pen tool. To activate the pen tool, I'm just going to click on it, and then I can go into my 2D or 3D workspace to be able to use this pen tool. Now it works similarly to the Illustrator pen tool. If I click once, release my mouse and move my mouse and click again, I'm creating different points to then create these lines. If I wanted to create a curved line, I just click and hold down and I can move my mouse to curve that line. Now to end the line, I either need to double click with my mouse, or I can click and then hit the escape key on my keyboard, and that will end the line as well. If I want to then select one of these internal lines, I'll go to my select tool, click on that internal line, and I can move it. If I want to edit the line I've created, I will need to turn on edit points, which is right underneath the select tool, and I can see all of my points appear. So then I can click those points. I can see little handles will appear, so I can readjust that curve if I would like to. I can drag a point and change the position of it, and so forth. If I want to delete any of these lines, I'll select that line and hit the delete or backspace button on my keyboard. Now you can see when I am drawing with my pen tool on my 2D side, it is giving me a second one on the other half of this pattern. That is due to symmetry. So the pattern that I'm working on right now has this double or dotted blue line going through the center of my garment, meaning it is symmetric. So in another lesson, I'll talk about how we can edit these patterns and make adjustments, but note if I am adjusting the sleeve, because it's symmetric, it's doing the adjustments on the other side. If I want to keep the symmetry of my pattern so that I can make these adjustments symmetrically, I can just turn off symmetry within my pen tool. And by doing that, I'll go into my pen tool, and on this toolbar right here, there is one that says symmetry. So if I uncheck that symmetry, I can now just create one line, or I can cross that symmetric plane, and I no longer have the two lines appearing. Symmetry is always going to be on by default, so you will need to turn that off with this button right up here. The other tools in this toolbar, we have cross. So cross will be if you want to draw over top of multiple pattern pieces. I can turn that on. If I'm on my 3D side, this works 2D or 3D, but 3D is a good example. Maybe I want to cross over these patterns. You can see that seam line there. It will allow me to create a line over top of those patterns. If cross is not on, the line is going to stop at that, and it's kind of going to jump back. It's trying to get to the other side. It looks like it's glitching out a little bit. So if you do want to draw over top of patterns, you need to make sure cross is on. The other ones we have are our snap to tools. So this is what your line is going to snap to. So if I want to snap maybe to the edge of my garment, making sure that my line is completely edge to edge, I can turn that on. You can see a little spark happens when I'm hitting the edge of my pattern. And we're going to make sure our edit points are off because we don't want to edit any of these. We just want to add a line. Clicking once, going to the bottom, you can see another spark, and clicking again and escape. So I now have that one line completely from one pattern edge to another pattern edge. And there's other snap to points, or there's other snap to tools like snap to point, edge, center, grid, and our guidelines. So a couple of those tools up there that we can utilize. Now you might be asking yourself, what are we using these internal lines for? These internal lines are the red lines that are inside of our pattern, so they're not outside of our pattern space, but on the pattern. And these internal lines can have properties added to them. So if I go to my select tool and click on that internal line I've created, on the right hand side in my context menu, if I scroll all the way down to the right hand side, I can see there's line properties. So this little button right here is going to show it on the 3D side. So because I didn't draw this line on the 3D side, it's only showing up on the 2D, but I can click this eyeball and then I can see it on the 3D side. So that's a great way if you're trying to create style lines, or maybe you want to eventually slice this pattern, you can see it visually on the 3D side. The next is symmetry. If I do want a symmetric copy, I can turn on and off symmetry, similarly to up top up there when we were in our pen tool. Cross is also there, but one of my favorites is actually cut marks. So cut marks is going to be similarly to if you want to like a color block or you want to create a seam line without actually editing or adjusting the pattern. I can click that cut marks button, and now you can see on my 2D side it's a dotted red line. If I toggle to my materials, I can see that I currently only have this fleece applied, but if I go ahead and I create another copy of this, or if I download one from my library, so if you go to libraries, I'm just under knits here, we'll just add this other fabric. I can just drag and drop that into the cut mark, and you can see it now looks as if there is a seam line there. Typically when you're trying to color block, I recommend taking that internal line and not showing it on the 3D side because you can see the seam a little bit better now. On top of there's stitch construction, so it's a flat seam, but maybe I want it to be open to give that shadow, to give that depth. You can see the seam there. Now if I move this dotted internal line, you can see that if it is no longer edge to edge, it no longer will show that other fabric applied there. So we do want to make sure all of our lines that we're creating to use this tool are edge to edge. Now it can be a little tricky to take your pen tool and to do the snap to, drawing it that way. One tool I really like to use to make sure my lines are edge to edge is if I select that line, and on the right hand side under actions, there's this button that says extend/shrink to edges. And when I click that button, you can see the line is completely extended. And if I drag that line, no matter where I drag it, it's staying glued to the edge. So it's extending it or shrinking it depending where it's sitting on the pattern. If you've already created a line, we are able to manually add that glue property. It's again on the right hand side under line properties, and it'll be the very last one of glue. So it's saying, do you want to glue this line? I'm going to say yes. And now no matter where I drag it, it is going to be glued to the edge. Now this is a best practice, I would say, when you are creating internal lines and specifically color blocking and such, so that you aren't losing that other fabric applied. And a beautiful thing about cut marks is that physics is applied to this area. So because I used a different fabric, I'm going to get a slightly different drape because of the different physics. So I can take the second line that I've created. I'm also going to add cut marks. I can see it's now shown there. Let's download another fabric. Let's do this geo. Going back to my garment and dragging and dropping. If you're getting a little lost right now as far as downloading and adding materials, I do have another video that covers materials and how to download and apply them and such. So definitely check that out if you are getting lost. Just updating my simulation because I have added physics, and now you can see I can change these lines. This cut mark overlapped with this one, so it's overtaking it. So if I needed to change it, I can just drag and drop those different sections. So to make things a little simpler, I'm going to delete one of my internal lines here, just so I'm focusing on one. Oops, moving my pattern here. So selecting that line again, going down here under line properties, I can see that I have covered symmetry, covered cross, covered cut marks. The next one's going to be shrink. So shrink is going to be as if I'm adding elastic along this entire line here. So if I click the shrink button, Under the properties, it's going to say what amount or percentage do I want it shrunk. I can change from percentage to ruler if I have a specific target measurement. So if I wanted to, this length right now is 36, maybe I want the target measurement to be 30. I can type in that distance, click Update 3D, and I can see the elastic starting to be added there. Now, if I toggle back to percent, I can see I only shrunk that line 17%. Let's make this dramatic and let's do 50%. Clicking that Update 3D, and you can see that shrink being added. And no matter where I move that line, that shrink property is going to follow. So if I click Update, you can see it's releasing in that area, and the shrink is now being added exactly where that line is. So this shrink function is actually really handy if you're doing like a ruching detail or something like that. So I'll give an example. If I delete that, update my 3D, and let's go under my pen tool, and let's make a couple lines. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to get an exactly straight line. Taking my line now, hitting that Extend/Shrink to Edges. And if I don't want to use my pen tool to just draw lines over and over again, there's a couple different ways that we can create clones. I can either do Control-C, Control-V, so copy and pasting, creating my copies, or there is also a button on the right-hand side called Clone by Offset. And when I do that, I'm able to clone my line in the X or the Y axis and create different copies. One thing to note though is that our Y axis is flipped. So if I want it to go up, I need to do a negative number, and if I want it to go down, I need to do a positive number. So I am going to do, let's do a quarter of an inch apart. So I'm going to do minus 0.25, and I want 5 copies, and I'm going to click Apply, and you can see 5 clones have been created of quarter inch apart. I could then select one of my internal lines, and let's hold down the Shift key and just select some of the lines right here. And then under my line properties, I'm going to do shrink. Let's do 40%, clicking Update 3D, and you can see it's kind of giving me that like ruching, smocking effect. So that's different ways that we can create that elastic look. Same with waistbands on pants. If you need to have like a sweatpant with some elastic in it, that is going to be the way to do it with your shrink tool. You can also add shrink to pattern edges. So maybe I wanted, the very bottom of this dress to have shrink on it. I can hold down the Shift key, selecting both edges, going to shrink, and I can type in my percentage, maybe 50%. The only thing that's going to be different though is now we have a depth. So instead of just shrinking a line, we're shrinking the edge, and we can do a certain measurement of depth. Think like if you have 1/2 inch elastic, 1 inch elastic, 2 inch elastic, that's going to be the depth that is shrinking from the pattern edge. So I'm going to do a 2 for 2 inch elastic. I'm going to update 3D, and you can see that has shrunk dramatically. So shrink's a really cool tool, specifically if you're just starting off and you want to play around with some stuff. There is shrink. And to get rid of it, you just uncheck the check mark. Make sure you keep doing this update dress. That's going to update your simulation so that you can actually see these changes on your 3D side. Now I'm just going to go ahead and delete these lines again for ease of use, just to continue demoing. So let's go ahead and draw another line here, going to our select tool and going under line properties. The other ones that we have here are going to be puffy, which I'm not going to cover right now, as puffy. It's a whole nother conversation, so we're going to skip over that one. But we will talk about fold. So fold's going to be if you have like a collar or a cuff or something. And actually, let's do it on the collar so we can fold this neck over. Let me make sure there's some shrink here. So I'm going to turn off the shrink. And just checking, all good. So I am going to take my pen tool, and I'm going to draw a line as if it's a fold line to fold this collar over. I'm going to extend/shrink to edge. And one thing I recommend when you are using the fold property is to change this pattern piece to be in that prepare mode. So if you've watched the other videos, we know how to prepare a garment by clicking that prepare button. Everything blows out into these 2D pattern pieces. But we just want to do that to the one individual piece so that we can see which direction it's folding. So to do that, I'm going to select my pattern, and on the right-hand side under Draping Properties, I'm going to uncheck Use in 3D, and then I'm going to recheck Use in 3D. So now it's just preparing that one pattern for me. I'm then going to select my internal line, and going down on my line properties section, clicking fold, I can see that that fold line has now folded over. If by chance your pattern is folding up, so it looks kind of funky like that, that means the system's reading this line and saying, oh, you want the bottom to fold up? Nope, that's not correct. We want it to actually fold down. So under here, we'll just click this invert fold direction, and I can now see that it's folding the correct way. Under this dropdown, we also have the ability to give it a sharp fold, a normal fold, or a soft fold. Most of the time, normal is going to be fine. If you're working on maybe a knit polo, change it to soft. If you have a really structured shirt, maybe you want sharp, or some cuffs or something. There's also advanced if you want to get really specific on the fold angle and layer offset and things. After you've done that, you can click dress, and you can see, actually, let's do that. You can see that it is now folding over. I'm going to go into my styling tool just to show you that a little bit better. So you can see there's my fold now on that collar. So maybe your turtleneck you're not folding over too often, but this is going to be anytime you're using, cuffs or collars, things like that. Note that multi-folds don't work well, so if you're trying to use the fold property a couple times to roll up a cuff, that does not work the best, so I don't recommend that. Clicking on my internal line, going down here, we did fold. We talked about our glue, ironing if you want, that to be a really crisp line. One that I do recommend testing out though is this inner slit, which is pretty cool. So if I take my pen tool and I draw a line, oops, make sure your edit points is off. Drawing a line, maybe I want a slit right there. Selecting that line, doing inner slit, clicking Update 3D, you can see it has now created that inner slit in my garment. Kind of cool, opens it up as if you were to cut an inner slit right there. You can change the positioning of that if you want. I'm going to delete it for now as we do not want an inner slit. So that's going to be talking about some of our pen tool line properties, things like that of all internal lines. Note you can also use the pen tool for drawing outside of the patterns too. So maybe I want to create a new pattern piece. If you take your pen tool, we are able to see that there's now a blue line that appears, and I can draw, and I've now created a new pattern piece. So I could stitch and attach this, make sure you go through the whole garment creation process, arranging it, stitching it, and so forth. But that is one way you are able to draft patterns. Another thing that you can do when doing pattern modifications is you can slice your patterns with your internal lines. So if I take my pen tool, draw an internal line, select it, extend/shrink to edge. Maybe let's rotate this a little straighter there. Maybe not. I can take that line, and then on the right-hand side, next to that extend/shrink to edge, there's a slice button. So if I click slice, it will actually separate those patterns and create a real seam line, unlike our just cut marks kind of thing. And note that it will keep the stitching. So if I go to my stitch tool, you can see that it's still stitched together. So if you've used your cut marks, found a really cool seam line that you want to keep, you can slice that and then slice your pattern. So it's going to be kind of a brief overview of our pen tool, different things that we can do with it, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any questions, just leave it in the comments below. Yeah, that's all for today.